Welcome to Pod Hostage Diplomacy. We work to free hostages and the unjustly detained around the world. Together with their families, we share their stories and let you know how you can help bring them home.
Now, when it comes to using the family for Russia to get what they want, if that's the case, they've picked the wrong family, because I'm not going to carry water for the Russian authorities.
These are some of the most courageous and resilient people among us.
I never thought that my mother, Nahi Tagavi, will ever have a link to negotiations in Vienna about the JCPOA. That's so crazy.
People who have never given up hope.
Trevor told his girlfriend to tell me to be strong. So I'm trying to be strong for Trevor.
You know, if Trevor can cope with what he's dealing with,
exactly,
we can sure cope with the stress.
People who will never stop working to reunite their families.
We'd like to meet with the president. We believe that, he's surrounded by lots of experienced and educated advisors, but I don't believe that any of them have ever had a child taken hostage by a foreign country, especially not a superpower like Russia.
And we'll be right there by their side until their loved one comes back home.
Because if enough people care, then the right people will care enough.
I'm Darren Nair, and I've been campaigning with many of these families for years. When I first started campaigning with these families, I noticed they struggled to get the media attention they needed. So I decided to create this podcast, which is a safe space for the families to speak as long as they need to about their loved ones and what needs to be done to bring them home.
Nobody can prepare you for what our family is going through. Even if someone had told me 1 year before, in 1 year this is going to happen, prepare yourself. That's impossible.
Thank you for listening, and welcome to Pod Hostage Diplomacy. Welcome to Pod Hostage Diplomacy. American citizen Eyvin Hernandez has worked for the Los Angeles County Public Defender's Office since 2006. He has always been a passionate advocate for the most vulnerable people in the Los Angeles community, including people experiencing homelessness, mental illness, and substance abuse. Eyvin served as a mentor and trainer for dozens of newly hired deputy public defenders. He also volunteered his time to advocate for children in the juvenile justice system. In March this year, Eyvin was detained by Venezuelan military agents near the Colombia-Venezuela border and has been held in a maximum security military prison in Caracas, Venezuela, to date. The United States government has classified Eyvin as being wrongfully detained. Today, we have the honor of speaking to Eyvin's brother, Henry Martinez. Henry, we're so sorry for what Eyvin, you and your family are going through. We'll do everything we can to help. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Can you please walk us through what happened to Eyvin?
Yes. So as you know and can imagine, he's been working for the Los Angeles County Public Defender's Office for the past 15 plus years. And, with this pandemic that we've been going through, his caseload has been, doubled per se. And he decided to take a vacation to Colombia, and which he's been to Colombia, a couple times. From there, he accompanied a friend as he makes friends all over the world as he travels, and decided to be a companion and get the friend a passport stamp so they can travel. Along the border, he was basically kidnapped by paramilitary groups. I'm not sure exactly. I don't have that identity. Who were the captors, but basically he was near the border. They recognized that he was an American. They asked for $100 to cross over to Venezuela, and he immediately replied with, I'm not trying to cross over to Venezuela. I understand the relationships between the two nations, and nor do I have $100. So, please, I just want to stay in Colombia. And, that's where he and his friend were taken abruptly in a very traumatic manner.
I'm so sorry to hear that. How did you know Eyvin was missing?
So me and my family, we had just came back from Florida from our little vacation on the 25th of March. I came back. I'd seen my mom. I'd seen my dad, and we talked. I think it was March 29th when my dad said, "Hey, I called Avon and he hasn't picked up. I sent him a couple messages. Have you talked to him?" I said, "No, actually, I haven't talked to him. I sent him a few messages that day too and didn't get a reply." And every time he's traveled, he at least talks to one of my parents, my mom or my dad, say good nights or how his day was, a little recap of his day, constantly in communication. March 30th came around. We still haven't heard anything from him. Then the 31st came, still nothing. Then me and my parents were, starting to get a little bit more worrisome on what's going on. This is not like his behavior. And that's when I started reaching out to calling the police stations in Medellin, Colombia, seeking for help. I have a brother who's out there. He's not answering our phone calls. Can you help us find him? I called hospitals, seeing if maybe something had happened to him and we can find him in the hospitals. I reached to the U.S. Embassy in Bogota, explaining the situation. And, April 1st came, I declared him a missing person in Colombia. We were able to locate his Airbnb where he was staying at. Those nights were very, very hard for us, not knowing what state and condition he was. And, we heard about a current trend in Colombia that people were sedated and kidnapped and start taking their money from the ATMs and then later reappeared elsewhere. And so I would have nightmares of having to fly to Colombia and identifying my brother's body. And it was very, very difficult for us. He was due to come back to Los Angeles April 3rd. And obviously he didn't get off that plane at the LAX. And, April 4th came, it was about 6 a.m. and my dad receives a message and says, "Hey, I have a message regarding Avon." We immediately, were overwhelmed by this news. We were thinking, he's been hostage, he's a hostage, or they're going to start asking for some money, what's going on. We were able to communicate with the public defender. That person messaging was his public defender. He said, "I'm his public defender in Venezuela. He's been detained for conspiracy and association to commit crimes against the state." And we were just like, whoa, like he wasn't planning on going to Venezuela. He would have told us if that was part of his plan, but he knew that was never his intention. We knew that was never his intention as well. And so I received a voice clip through WhatsApp and basically he said, I'm being held. They're going to do a 45-day investigation period. There's nothing against me. They don't have any type of evidence. I should be free in the next 45 days. Okay. That's where that was the last communication I had from him. It was about 57 days later when I received a phone call saying that he was in Caracas, DGCIM, maximum security prison.
I'm sorry to hear that. I've interviewed members of the Citgo Six that were released last month, and they were held in the DRC, the DGCIM as well. So they spoke about their family spoke about the conditions, the appalling conditions. Is your brother being held in solitary confinement at the moment? Or was he being held in solitary confinement at any time?
Yeah, so the information that I've been able to gather through our conversations is He was in solitary confinement for, I would say, about the first 4.5 months. He it's a small space, small cell. The lights are on 24/7. He's not allowed to take adequate sleep. Because of that. Yes, it's not a very it's not a safe place to be in. It's very hard on the body and on the mind.
Again, I'm sorry for what Avon's going through. Does he have any medical conditions? And if so, is he being given appropriate medical care?
No, he doesn't have any pre-existing conditions or anything like that. He's very health conscious. My brother, he's a vegetarian. He likes to maintain his body fit, and he was always active, exercising. So he's very health conscious. Also, he was into like salsa and dancing, and so he was a competitive dancer. So no, he doesn't have any pre-existing conditions. But as far as medical attention, he said he was sick most recently. He thinks that he had the Omicron virus or something, because it really took a toll on him, and he was able to get a couple vitamin shots from what he's been able to tell me.
Well, it's good that he doesn't have any medical conditions, and I'm not surprised that he got COVID-19, because the Citgo 6 members, and most of them were in their late 50s and 60s. They got COVID-19 twice in prison. Or I don't think it was the DGCIM, but the state of Venezuelan prisons is simply terrible. Is Avon being given food and water? The reason I ask is I know for other Americans held in Venezuelan prisons, their families had to get someone based locally to deliver food to them. Is that what's happening for Avon?
Fortunately, I'm able to provide a few nutritional foods. However, I don't know the exact situation. I think he wants to make sure that we're not overstressed, and so he says he's fine. I think I would say the same thing to my family if I were in the similar situation. You don't want to put your family through this hardship. And I think he does that with us. So I can't tell you exactly the truth, because I don't know. But I have been able to provide some food to him, some like protein shake or something.
Well, that's good to know. So you mentioned at the beginning, you received the message from Avon's public defender in Venezuela. So obviously he has a lawyer. Has he been taken to court, and has there been a trial?
I don't think there's been a trial yet. I think it's this process is stretched to as much as it can. The first, I think, preliminary hearing was deferred at least 10 times. The communication was, I should have a court hearing next week, and then something would happen. It would get deferred the following week or 2 weeks down the line. The same situation for whatever reason. There's always a reason, but the court hearings were always pushed back. So the latest right now is his preliminary hearing took place, I think, in late August, and I don't think he's had anything since then. And the case has gone through several public defenders. So the original public defender is not holding that case now, and so I don't really have communication with the appointed public defender.
So, Henry, just taking a step back here for the benefit of our listeners. We know Avin has been working for the LA County Public Defender's Office, and he's been doing amazing work. But can you tell us more about his background, specifically the earlier years of his life, and what else he has been up to?
Yeah, I mean, so my brother is 7 years older than me, and he went off to college, and he did his own thing. I did my own thing, but throughout his high school years, I recall him trying out for the baseball team, the football team, and he really obtained like this disciplined mindset from I would say from high school, and he pursued pure mathematics and physics for his bachelor's, graduated there, and decided to go to law school, which he finished in 2005, and was selected by the Los Angeles County to be a part of the public defender's team. But throughout this whole time, I mean, as I've been able to meet a lot of his new friends, I've been able to meet a lot of his friends through this ordeal. I realized how much he has been there for a lot of people, dedicated time to help others that are in need, off the clock, friends, families. He would help out my daughter with math tutoring, and he's very passionate on helping, and he's the type of person that will drop what he's doing to help you out if you ever need. That's the type of person he is. He was part of the union for public defenders. I think he was on the board. He was heavily involved with like community activism, juvenile detention centers, helping out people who are desperately in need.
Definitely sounds like a great guy. And you mentioned the salsa dancing. Yeah, so he's a competitive salsa dancer. And that explains why he's in fit condition. When was the last time you spoke to your brother, and how is he doing now?
It's been several days now since I spoke to him, and the conversations sometimes become repetitive. I love you, I miss you, and stay strong. Everything's going to be all right. I'm doing everything I can to bring you home. He said he understands. He tells me he's strong. He's saying he's fine, but there's some times where I can hear his voice weakening, and just despair in his mind. There's the uncertainty of how long this is going to take is sometimes what gets to all of us, especially him. He's the one that's suffering the most. I think that's the hardest part.
This is obviously a very traumatic time for all of you, and not just Avin. How have you and the rest of your family been coping with this trauma?
There's some good days or better days and bad days, and I'm fortunate to have a strong unit at the house. We constantly support each other. A lot of his friends and colleagues who are really helping me, get through this. It's overwhelming. I think as long as we get to hear his voice and as long as he gets to call is what keeps us pushing. There's nothing else to do but to focus on him and bringing him home.
I say this to many of the former hostages. Tough times don't last. Tough people do. And I mean, a lot of the families, like the Sickle Six families, they said in the meantime, while they were going through this tremendous ordeal, they found solace in religion. Some of them went to therapy. Have you guys been doing something similar?
Yeah. So, my mother, she's a Christian, and she's just constantly praying. She's done fasting. My dad has, continued to go to church. And he does his prayers. We light candles. I myself, I've done several things. I've done my fasting as well. I try to get into some exercise to, get my brain and my body flowing, but sometimes it's hard to even concentrate on that, because there's so much to do, so many things to do. But, just making sure, I have my kids and making sure that I'm here for them as well. That balance is important. My wife, she supports me tremendously, and I'm glad to be surrounded by people who give me that support.
Making sure you yourself are healthy is very important. In order to be the best advocate for your brother, you need to be strong and you need to be healthy, because this is not going to be a race or a short sprint. It's going to be a marathon. So you need to take care of yourself as well. And I know it's easier said than done, but obviously keeping yourself healthy, exercising is a very good way of coping. What should the Venezuelan government do?
Wow, that's I think the obvious answer is release my brother. I think I know that they're aware that he's no spy, and there's plenty of evidence to show that he's an immigrant from El Salvador. Did what he had to do, go to school and serves the community, serves the public. He's been there 7 months now, and just let him go. Just let him go.
What should the U.S. government be doing better?
There's they've had the most recent Americans that have been released from Venezuela, 7, is something that gave me more hope. There's engagement between the two nations, and I hope they're doing what they say they're going to do behind the scenes. I think they need to be more vocal about what's going on, more transparent, and I guess move with a more sense of urgency. I think there are other things that could be pushed to the side and focus on the innocent Americans that are being held hostage, not just in Venezuela, but all around the globe.
Yeah, so for the benefit of our listeners, last month on the 1st of October, 7 Americans who were wrongfully detained in Venezuela were freed in a prisoner swap between the US and Venezuela. This included Jose Pereira, Tomio Vidal, Jorge Toledo, Alirio Zambrano, Jose Luis Zambrano, Matthew Heath, and Osman Khan. We interviewed Jose Pereira on our last episode, and we are very happy that Jose and the other Americans were freed and now back home with their families. Avin was unfortunately left behind. Now, I know you just mentioned that it did give you hope that it is possible to bring Americans home that were held hostage, wrongfully detained in Venezuela. So even though he was detained in March, he was only recently classified by the US State Department as being wrongfully detained. What are your thoughts on the delay here? And do you think if the US State Department classified Avin as wrongfully detained sooner, he would be back home with his family right now?
Yes, that was a bittersweet moment. As I was reading the news, word for word. I seen 7 Americans released from Venezuela, and I'm reading the names. You know, I seen he wasn't on there, and it was heartbreaking, you know. But again, like I said, I am so happy for the families. I'm so happy for the Americans who are back. But it was a punch in the gut, and definitely hard to swallow. And do I think, had he been declared wrongfully detained sooner, would he have been on that plane? I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, I don't know. I want to believe so, you know, but I can't. I mean, I want to believe so. I think the process of declaring a person wrongfully detained is unclear. I know there's the Livingston Act, which has about 11 criterias to classify a wrongfully detained person, but what does that look like? I mean, who do we talk to, right? To see what steps they're on. You know, there's that disconnection that exists in that stage, and why can't there be a dialogue between the government and families who are going through these stages? You know, why is there there's no set time to this determination process? As you know, Biden had the executive order July 19th because this is happening far too often. And with that said, I mean, like, there should be a clearer picture on what the process looks like.
No, I absolutely agree with you. President Biden issued this executive order and declared this a national emergency because there are too many Americans currently held hostage and wrongfully detained abroad. So President Biden declared this a national emergency, and the executive order gives the government power to penalize the countries that are taking Americans hostage or wrongfully detaining them. And in terms of the criteria within the Levinson Act, it's good to have this criteria. So I understand the delays and frustrations with the process in the United States, but as someone living in Britain, you guys have it better. I mean, not necessarily all the countries, and I know that it's not comforting, but we, like in the UK, many of us who have been advocating for British citizens held hostage overseas or wrongfully detained are lobbying the government to create our version of the Levinson Act, our version of the US Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs. And I know the folks in Australia are doing the exact same thing. So having this Levinson Act with this criteria in Section 2, subsection A, that lists this is what that you use to classify an American as wrongfully detained abroad. I mean, these are the criteria you need to meet. Having that is obviously a good thing. But I think the issue I've seen with the US is there has to be a time limit for them to make the decision. And that's what's missing here. So I don't doubt the intentions of the State Department and the Spearheart team. I've spoken to some of them. They're great people. And I mean, they work very hard to bring Americans home. Every family I've interviewed has nothing but positive things to say about the Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs and his team. But I think there's still room for improvement. There needs to be a timeline. They need to make this decision within, like, you know, maybe 2 months, 3 months. It can't go on. They're very quick with Brittany Griner, and they were absolutely right. She needs to come home. But it seems right now that if you want your loved one to be classified wrongfully detained, if they meet the criteria, you need to go to the public, get the media to cover your case, and pile on the public pressure. Journalists and news outlets can play a huge role in putting pressure on the government to act faster. So from your perspective, what can journalists and news outlets do to help your campaign to bring your brother home?
I mean, this is a very unfortunate situation for the American hostages and detained and the families that are going through it. And, it's one of those things where, you say it's never going to happen to me. We're never going to go through something like this. And here we are. And so that lets the journalists to put themselves in that situation where, these families are in desperate situation and we need our voices heard. And I think we rely on the journalists and the media so much in order to get traction, in order to get our voices heard. And I think it's like you mentioned, it's clear, without public awareness, these cases can easily be put in the back burner.
You're absolutely right. I say this to many people. Hostage diplomacy doesn't happen to everyone, but it can happen to anyone. And it can happen to journalists too. American journalist Jason Rezaian was held hostage in Iran for 544 days. Currently, Australian journalist Cheng Lei has been wrongfully detained in China for 2 years so far. So this happens to journalists as well. Now, Henry, what can the public do to help bring Avin home?
I mean, definitely follow us on Instagram at Bring Avin Home. We have a Twitter, Bring Avin Home, Facebook page, Bring Avin Home. There's a GoFundMe, Liberty and Justice for Avin. There's a petition at change.org. Please sign, please share, and, follow the case. Any updates we posted, so you can follow the case and see where we're at and how you guys can help. We'll be going to DC November 15th through the 17th. We'll be attempting to talk to as much as elected officials as possible and see if we can get their support in efforts to bring Avin home. We're hoping to do a press conference on the 16th between 8 a.m. and 9. And, we'll post that as well, a little bit more information. Just be aware of the situation and spread awareness to globally about countries that are doing these type of activities.
You also have a website. The URL is bringavinhome.org, right? So if you go to that website, it has the links for all your social media accounts. I think it has the petition, link to the petition as well. It also has lots of information on Avin. When I was doing research for this episode, I went to that website and most of the information I got was from that website. So it's bringavinhome.org. Now, for our listeners who, let's say they don't have the time to go to your website or check your social media channels, but if they come across their local representatives, their congressmen, their senators, their governors, or even if they come across White House staff, they're probably going to have maybe 5 seconds to say something and to be heard. What are the key points you would want them to say about Avin?
Oh man, it's a hard question. You have a government employed who's held hostage in Venezuela. What are you going to do about it? Had this be one of your family members, how would you react? Please support the cause and bring him home.
That's good. Now we're almost at the end of our interview. Is there anything else you'd like to mention?
I mean, I think sometimes, including myself, listeners often think, my involvement is not really going to do much. As a listener, please get involved. Your engagement actually makes a difference, and just like voting. So make sure you go vote. Just being engaged and supporting, sharing, retweeting. That I think that helps more than we often think.
Absolutely. Now, Henry, I said this at the beginning of this episode, and I'll say it again. We're so sorry for what you and Avin are going through, and we'll be right here campaigning by your side until Avin comes home. Thank you for taking the time to speak to us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Pod Hostage Diplomacy. Thank you for giving your time and for showing these families that they're not alone, that there are good, caring people out there willing to stand by their side and help in any way possible.
Because if enough people care, then the right people will care enough. This is a basic rule of thumb that is true for all campaigning.
If you haven't already, please subscribe to our fortnightly newsletter called The Hostage Briefing. It's the best way to keep up to date with the cases we're working on, as well as new episodes. You can subscribe to this newsletter using the link in the description of this podcast episode that you're currently listening to. Thanks again, and take care.